Hey, what's up? This is the College Investor Audio Show. Thanks so much for being here. So excited you're here today. Today, our own Robert Farrington was on the Smart College Buyer podcast, and basically all things student loans is happening today. So we're going to take a deep dive here. And without further ado, here is the Smart Buyer podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Smart College Buyer podcast. As always, my name is Jack Wang. I'm your host. I get to interview today someone who I've followed for a while, not going to lie, huge fan of, and I still remember how we originally met. I'm going to tell that story in just a moment. But my guest today is Robert Farrington. Robert is the founder of the College Investor website and has been featured in many media outlets on both a local and national level. He is America's millennial money expert and America's student loan debt expert. He is on a mission, and this is why we want to talk today, to help people escape student loan debt and start building wealth for the future. So, Robert, thank you so much. I'm such a huge fan.
Oh, thanks so much. I am excited to be here and talking about this stuff because it's a huge passion of mine. And I know we've connected at past events. And I mean, we talk about this stuff and I bet we're going to nerd out right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just share the quick story. And I don't know if you remember this. So we actually met at FinCon 21 in Austin, Texas. And the reason I remember it is because I think it was like the opening reception or something. Like, I think it was in the line waiting for drinks. And all the doors were locked near where I was. And you come knocking on the door. At the time, you know, there was still masking and stuff. So I remember you knocking on the door and I was right there. So I opened the door and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is Robert Farrington. Like, oh, wow, right? Like, and I still remember that, right? That's actually the first time we met. Now, I don't remember if you remember that. That's okay if you don't. But I remember it because it was such a moment for me at just a completely random time, FinCon, my first ever FinCon, in line waiting for a beer. Like, it doesn't get any better.
Right.
So I'm thrilled to have you on with me. So I know you and I have talked a lot before, but I would love to have you share with our audience a little bit about how you started and sort of what led you down the path to start the College Investor and have it become the website that it is today.
Absolutely. So I love that story because we've connected now at like 3 or 4 of these FinCons.
Yeah, we have to take an annual photo, right? Like we do, and we did that right before, right? It's always one picture a year.
And we always come across each other in the beer line. I don't know how that happens either. But I started the College Investor as a truly unintentional financial journalist. I never intended to talk about student loans and paying for college and any of that stuff. I actually started it because I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. I'm a side hustler. So when I was finishing college, I loved reading financial media like Yahoo Finance, things like that. And I was like, I want to talk about this stuff. And I'm a little techie. I love the website stuff. So I started a website and I started just kind of writing about why you need to start investing and why you should start investing in stocks and how to save for retirement. And how do you get money? I was side hustling. I was selling things on eBay and I was taking that extra money and I was investing it. And my investments were paying dividends. And I was like, oh my gosh, you could make money from investing. And it was like the coolest thing ever when you're like 21 years old, 22 years old, right? But then I had people say, hey, that's cool. I'd love to do that. But I have these student loans. And I had student loans. And I was like, you know, it's true. Like student loans are kind of a problem and I'm paying off my loans. So what does any good financial person do? We start writing about student loans.
Of course.
And I came to a point where I had an issue with my loan servicer, FedLoan, who's no longer a student loan servicer, and they screwed up my direct debits. And they sent me delinquency notices and said, like, you haven't paid your loans on time. And it was total BS. And anyways, I fought the good fight, battled customer service, got it resolved. But then what does any good blogger do? Got to write about it.
Got to write about it. Absolutely.
And so I wrote this article. And even to this day, it's one of the most commented articles on my site. It had over 700 plus comments of people saying, me too, and nobody's talking about the student loan problem. And it was a huge eureka, eye-opening moment for me about how dysfunctional the student loan system was. And I really went down a rabbit hole of learning all about it. And that was the precipice. And I started writing a lot about student loans, how to get out of student loans, how to deal with these loan servicers. And it was great. It was very helpful content. But it wasn't always I never felt like it was going to solve the problem because the problem actually isn't the student loans. The problem is the head of the student loans and paying for college.
Right.
And how we got here and why people are borrowing these loans. And so over the last 5 or 6 years, it's really transformed our messaging and, helping people navigate money and education because it's not clear. It's not the same for everybody. And there's a lot of tools and services and ideas and concepts around saving for college, paying for college, getting out of debt, as well as the tools that you can arm your children from checking accounts and savings accounts and financial literacy along the way, so that ideally you set up young adults to also be financially literate and financially successful once they're done. And so that's a lot of what we talk about and how we've gotten to where we're at today.
Yeah, I love it because because you're right. I mean, especially at a event like FinCon, right? There's a lot of like financial coaches, right? I know many of them, and they help with debt or whatever. But I love the fact that on your site you talk about these other things too, because it goes. I mean, yes, debt and student loan debt is a huge issue, no doubt. But you go really beyond that because I know the question that I often get is, I have extra money. Do I pay down my debt or do I save it? Right? Like it's sort of the quintessential question that I think everybody has. So I'm just kind of curious about your personal opinion on that, right? Because you kind of talk about all these subjects, right? Not just the student loans, but also saving, investing. So in your opinion, this is an opinion, no financial advice here, right? But just an opinion. Where do you fall on the I'll take my extra money and pay down debt versus I'll take my extra money to save/invest? Where do you fall on that spectrum?
I fall on you need to do both, and how aggressive you pay down the debt depends on what type of debt it is. And I think that a lot of people put all debt in one bucket. I know there's some famous financial people that talk about you put all your debts and snowball them and you go down the list. But I truly believe that student loans should be treated completely separately. It should not be in your snowball list. So yes, you should save and you should invest, but you should also pay down your debt. But you should also understand how to pay down your student loans effectively, because for about 50% of Americans with student loans, paying down the student loan is probably the worst financial move you can make. The savvier financial move is lowering your payment as much as legally allowed by law and getting the loan forgiveness that is also legally allowed by law today. And so I think a lot of people just need to understand those options. Now, if you had credit card debt, auto loans, get rid of that stuff.
Right.
But when we're talking about education debt, I also want to remind people that the biggest enemy of long-term investing is time. It's also the biggest ally of long-term investing. And what I mean by this is that you will never be 22 again. Never will be. You'll never be 23 again, 24 again, 25 again. And the biggest thing you need for long-term investing is time for the compounding to take effect.
Yep.
And if you could start at $100 at 22, it goes so much more valuable. I think I saw a study the other day, and totally tell me if I'm wrong, but the value of $1 when you're 18 is 10x the value of $1 when you're 55.
I believe that's correct.
Something like that. And so it's just like, you're not actually putting $1 in when you're 18 or 22. You're putting $10.
Yep.
And if you can just keep at it, and that's where I'm a big believer in it. And it's hard. Like, let's not dismiss the fact that it can be challenging because there's not a lot of money there, but I'm also a huge advocate of free money opportunities like 401k matches, 403b matches, HSA matches, things like that, where it's like, you're getting free money. Take advantage of it.
Right, exactly. So, it's really interesting about this notion that you talk about how student debt shouldn't be part of the snowball, because you're right. Like, so many people consider like debt is debt, right? And there's a lot of people that I run to which really who have the mentality that any debt is bad, right? Now, some debt's sort of necessary. Like if you need a mortgage, buy a house, you need a place to live. Okay, fine. But, even then people try and pay it off, pay it off quickly or whatever. I remember you wrote an article on this too in Forbes. And I remember reading it and thinking like this guy gets it, because it's contrary to a lot of typical quote unquote financial advice out there. It makes a lot of sense because if you can invest, you can take that benefit of time and compounding and stuff. But there's also so much emotion and guilt or, other things just around debt in general. And actually, I'm going to have you talk a little bit about student debt, but like federal student loans especially come with features that do not exist anywhere else.
Exactly.
Right? Can you just take a moment just to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So why do you treat federal student loans different than any other type of debt? Is because they have three main benefits. The first one is income-driven repayment plans. So this sets your monthly repayment at anywhere from 5 to 15% of your monthly discretionary income. And that could be zero. And if you are a family of 4 making less than about $80,000 a year, it will be zero on the SAVE repayment plan today. There's no reason to make a student loan payment. It's legally $0. So that's a huge benefit. Benefit number 2 is student loan forgiveness programs. So there are some very famous student loan forgiveness programs like public service loan forgiveness, where if you work 10 years in public service, you'll get the remaining balance on your loans forgiven. There's other ones that are like any of those income-driven repayment plans that I just talked about. All of them include loan forgiveness after 20 or 25 years. And so if life does not work out for you as intended, after 20 years, your loan balance is done. So think about that, though, when you're 22. At 42, you could be debt-free if nothing worked out. And you could have also paid nothing on your student loans during that time if your work situation and life was not working out.
Right.
And so that's a huge benefit. And then I will say there's over 80 different loan forgiveness programs in this country. I think a lot of people just dismiss that fact that there are so many ways to get your loans forgiven. You want to buy a house in Maryland? Guess what? They have a loan forgiveness program for that. You want to move to Kansas? There are loan forgiveness programs for that. Just cause. So look around. Third option is the deferment and forbearance. I call them the hardship options. So if you run into a hard time, you can defer your loans. You can get forbearance for your loans. That means you don't pay on your student loans. Depending on your loan type, you also might not even have interest accruing on your student loans for that. So there are a lot of huge benefits to student loans that you don't get with other loan types. And that's why I like to bucket them outside of it. And a lot of people will be like, but there's all this lawsuits and there's all this uncertainty and there's all this other stuff going on with student loans today as we're recording this.
Yep.
But guess what? Your loans are paused. My goodness, okay, there's all these lawsuits and none of us that are on this show or listening to this show have any say in the outcome of the student loan lawsuits. But you know what you do have a say in is your monthly budget, and your student loan payment is currently zero because of all the lawsuits.
Take advantage of that.
Just take advantage of it. This is where you get all these options. And I think you can't dismiss those options. And that's why student loans should be treated separately. And then from a financial planning perspective specifically, paying them off is not always the better financial plan. If the goal is to have more net worth at the end than at the beginning, you might not necessarily want to pay those off.
And that's a great point because I think so many people are focused on being out of debt rather than growing net worth, right? Which are two totally different things, right? Being out of debt is great, but increasing net worth is really kind of where I would like to be.
Yeah.
So, but I know in my experience in working with families, there's just this whole concept around changing repayment plans that you can do at any time for any reason just because, right? That concept is so foreign because it doesn't exist anywhere else. And I use the example of let's say you had a 15-year mortgage and something happened, you can't afford it. You can't just arbitrarily start sending in a payment equal to a 30-year mortgage, right? Your bank's going to say something. And to get a 30-year mortgage, you have to refinance, which if you have something going on, may not actually work, right? But with federal student loans, you can be like, I'm going to switch this plan to go a lower payment. Ta-da, done. I mean, it's not quite that. I mean, there's some processing involved, but conceptually it's done, right? Just boom, done, right? And that just doesn't exist anywhere. And so people's minds are blown wait, you can do that? I didn't know that.
There definitely is a concept that impacts a lot of families of debt is like a moral obligation. And I think that's a burden for a lot of families where I'd like to just let you know it's a financial contract. That's what it is. There's set rules and guidelines. And I always like to quote Warren Buffett is that I will pay as much or as little taxes as I'm legally required. You should have the same concept with your student loans. I will pay as little on my student loans as legally required by law. It's just savvy. You don't just send the IRS an extra $5,000 you're feeling like it this year.
Right.
What the heck? You're an American. Americans have a duty as Americans to pay the government as much as legally required by law. And the same applies with student loans. And I really just want to extol that message to people. And, in some ways, paying the littlest amount on your student loans as legally required does mean let's pay them off as fast as we can.
Right.
If you make a lot of money and your payments are fully amortized, let's not have as many interest payments accrue. But if you have a subsidized loan payment because you're on an income-driven plan, please don't pay more than you're legally required to. It's your duty as an American citizen.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's Yeah, it's a foreign concept because especially here in this country, I can't really speak for other countries, but like when, we're basically taught if you borrow, you have to pay it back, right?
By the terms and conditions of said agreement.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think they leave out that part, right? Like as we're like growing up and learning this stuff, like you just have to pay it back. But you're absolutely right because there can be a lot of flexibility with federal student loans. Let me ask you this question because I know you write a ton around this, right? And I know you talk to a lot of people about this. What would you say is probably the biggest misconception about student debt and or federal student loans?
The biggest misconception, there's so many of them. I don't even know where to go with this one, but I would say that, one of them is they can't be discharged in bankruptcy. I think is a very common one, and they can, but I want everyone to know why they aren't typically. And they aren't typically because of all the things we just talked about. So when you go before a bankruptcy judge and you say, I can't afford my student loan payments, the bankruptcy judge is going to be like, why? And they're like, well, it's this much amount per month. But when you say it's an income-driven plan and your amount per month is zero, the judge just looks at you and says, well, that's not a hardship, and that's why your loans aren't going to be forgiven in bankruptcy.
Right. Well, if you can't afford zero, that's like a different problem.
But then you also probably wouldn't be in bankruptcy.
Right.
And so I think that's a huge misconception. I also, think there's just a big misconception that these loan forgiveness programs that we're seeing in the political media today are somehow like being unilaterally done by the president or one party. And that's also a big myth. So there's no blanket loan forgiveness, and that will never happen. But there are a lot of loan forgiveness programs that require you to do something to get something. And so public service loan forgiveness is the most famous one. And it was actually created by George W. Bush.
Right.
In 2007.
Yeah.
Yes. So a Republican president created a loan forgiveness program. My God, it's a weird world we live in. But without that, you have to work in public service for 10 years and make 120 qualifying payments before any balance is forgiven. Now, that payment could be zero on an income-driven repayment plan or very low, but we're asking you to work 10 years in public service, which I guess say is a societal good, and I agree it is.
Right.
But these are teachers and nurses and firefighters and police officers. That's a pretty thankless job. And if they do it for 10 years, they can get a remaining balance forgiven. And that's the shortest loan forgiveness program. There's teacher loan forgiveness. It's 5 years, not as good.
But that's only partial.
And it's partial, but that's the shortest total loan forgiveness program there is. The other ones are 10 or 20 or 25 years. And just think about this logistically. If you get your loan forgiven after 20 years, you had a student loan for 20 years and you never had a payment that allowed you to pay it off. Your life didn't work out, right? So okay, it's going to get forgiven at that point in time. And so I just think there's a lot of misunderstandings of how the loan system works and what the requirements are. And it sucks because the political narrative in our society kind of overtakes the truth. And
Right.
I think it's really important to talk about the truth on these things.
Yeah, no, I remember. And I tell people that was back in 2007, George W., bipartisan, right, kind of initiative. So it's a good thing, right? Because you're right. It is societal good, right? We do need teachers. We need good teachers. We need firefighters and police officers and military members. Those are all good things, right? I don't think anybody would say oh, yeah.
And I also just think let's go to the private sector. Signing bonuses are common. You can get retention bonuses for staying on places. This loan forgiveness program is effectively the same thing. We want you to be a teacher because we need teachers. And if you do the job for 10 years, we'll give you this bonus of forgiving your loans at the end of it. It's no different than almost any other career path. Even the military today, you get your 4-year enlistment and they give you all this money. Please stick around for 4 more years. It's so common, but for some reason, the idea that we're forgiving the loan versus just giving a cash bonus, really freaks people out, I think.
No, that's a great I never really thought about it that way, but you're absolutely right. I mean, and we want people in these fields and to stick around and be good at what they're doing because they're contributing to society, right? So let me ask you, so let's kind of stay on the topic of student debt for a moment, but let's talk a little bit about private student loans, right? Sometimes they have more options on the front end, I always feel, right? Borrower, interest rate, payment, whatever. Fewer protections and options on the back end. What are some of do you think the misconceptions are there with private student loans?
I have a love-hate relationship with private student loans. On the hate side, I wish we didn't need them. And that's really the bigger frustrating aspect of it. Because the reason most people pursue private student loans is that they are capped on how much they can borrow federally, and or it's a parent borrower that's looking at the Parent Plus loan and seeing like a 9% interest rate and a 4.5% origination fee. And they're like, but I have good credit and good income, and they can see a private loan at 5 or 6% this year. As we're recording this, who knows where the rates will be in the future. But those are really the two drivers of private loans. And it frustrates me that that's the reason. But if those are your alternatives, they can be a good alternative. But I also want families to realize that you need to be making this decision for a private loan based on your financial ability to pay today, specifically for parents. You're kind of being entrusted with the ability to get a private loan because of your financial ability to repay today. And this should not be a child's loan. Like, even if the child is the borrower and you're the cosigner, look, mom and dad, it's your loan.
Right.
And so it should be based on your ability to repay today, and you should treat it as your debt today. And I think that's my love-hate. My love is that you've got better interest rates, no origination fees, no prepayment penalties. You go to the state-based nonprofit lenders, they really have very competitive rates because they're able to borrow at super low interest rates. Those are great tools, but it really is frustrating that the reason people are looking at those tools typically is because they're overpaying for college, in my opinion.
Right. I'll say one thing about cosigners. And I work with a bunch of different families, all different backgrounds, but for the most part, the families I work with, the parents did also go to college, right? And so they want their kid to go to college, and that's why they talk to me. I can't tell you how many times people will bring up the topic of cosign private student loans, where the parent says, well, I'm co-signing, but I'm not responsible, right? The kids, I'm like, no, that's not how it works. If you co-sign and your kid doesn't pay, they're coming after you.
100%.
Right?
And I see so many bad things happen. And let's talk about this with both cosign loans and Parent Plus loans. I see the back end way too much. And granted, my picture is skewed. There's plenty of people that navigate it just fine. But not only does it hurt families financially, but I see it tear apart family dynamics way too frequently. And what I mean by this is that mom and dad think the kid's going to pay, the kid can't afford to pay, then mom and dad's left in the lurch. Or, there was agreements to do it. They thought it was one person's loan and not the other. And now you're just mad at each other as family members and won't go to Thanksgiving dinner or whatever it is. And you literally, there's the financial aspect of these loans, but then there's just also the, you're going to blow up your family over this debt. Right. And it's sad how frequently it happens.
Right.
And then typically, again, we're in this situation because people are trying to borrow beyond the federal loan limits. So there's a really big risk of a negative ROI of college, and you're basically overpaying for college. So the kid does not make enough money to service the debt. Right. And then parents are approaching retirement age and they're not looking to service the debt, and it's just a mess.
Yeah. So, we could talk about this for hours, right? And but let's talk a little bit about sort of how student loans sort of even come into place the first place, right? Which is really the front end, which is based on where you can go to college and how much aid you're going to get and things like that, right? So talk to our audience a little bit about sort of your thoughts around the front end, right? And some of the things you see with families, and because obviously if they're going to go to a really inexpensive college, they may not need to borrow at all, right? But they're going to go to an expensive college. That's really where the borrowing comes in, right? Yep. So talk a little bit about sort of on the front end and sort of this concept of ROI for college.
Yeah, so I operate under a strong ROI framework, and that's return on investment. Because, first off, let's say that education is valuable, it's great, and education is free. And you can get the best education for free. You can watch Cornell, MIT professors online for free. Yep. You can learn any subject in this world today for free. But we're talking about a college education. And that gets you a document at the end that just says you did it. Mm-hmm. And that costs money. And so I operate that you're investing in an education. And the typical reason that you're investing in education is that you want to have a higher career earning potential than if you didn't go to college. And there's a lot of studies and a lot of data, but the one everyone likes to say is that those that went and got a 4-year college degree earn $1 million more over their lifetime than those that didn't go and get a college degree. And it comes from the Social Security Administration data, and I've looked at that study, and there's many other ones today, and we have great data sets. And you want to know something? On average, it is true that if you get a bachelor's degree, you will earn more than someone that does not get a bachelor's degree.
Right.
However, like any other investment, we'll start at really basic numbers. But if I told you were going to earn $1 million, would you pay me $1 million to earn $1 million?
Probably not.
No, it doesn't make any sense. It's a wash. And I think that's what people don't realize when you're paying for college, that there is a net present value of that $1 million in today's dollars.
Yep.
And if you spend more than that, it's a bad investment because you wouldn't spend $1.1 million to earn $1 million.
Right, exactly.
You would not. But if you said, hey, I was going to spend $500,000 to get $1 million, you're like, yeah.
Right.
Like,
right.
I just made $500,000. And that's how we need to approach this college decision process. And so you can do math, and there's a lot of variables in the net present value of interest rates and projections and whatnot. But a lot of people see college is worth anywhere between $20,000 and $80,000 on average in today's dollars.
Okay.
That's to get to the million.
Right.
And that's the average. So, but if you spend past 80, you're at past 50% likelihood of not getting an ROI.
Right.
And that's where it's concerning. But it's also like buying a fancy car. If you have all the cash in the world and you want to buy that fancy Mercedes and you're paying cash for it, go ahead. Well, I'll tell you it's not the best car to get for your money, but if that makes you happy, do it. But if you're borrowing money and you just are trying to get college to get through, to get to that career, to earn more money, maybe that used Honda Civic that you're writing a little tiny check for is a better investment.
Right.
And that's how I like families to think about this. As you're making that investment, it's net price, but what check are you writing? And if you write too much, it could be a negative ROI.
So just, we have time for just one last question. So I know we've covered a lot. This has been great. Most of the time spent on student loans, a little bit about the front end. But if you could share with our audience, like your top number one tip about either one of these, if you take nothing else away except for this one thing, what would that be?
My tip is not finance related, but it's really for the parents and the students to have the courageous conversation about money and value and transparency on what everyone's going to pay, what everyone's into it for, and what the kid wants to do. Because I actually see that the real reason we get into these troubling situations is that parents are not comfortable to tell the kid that you probably shouldn't go to this $40,000 a year school because financially you're going to screw yourself or you're going to screw us.
Right.
And I really want to encourage families to have more courageous conversations and more transparency about money going into this so that better informed decisions can be made throughout the process.
And that is our show for today. If you want to check out more about the Smart Buyer podcast, you can view all the links and everything inside the description in this podcast. Also, hit subscribe so you're always up to date when we post new content. You can also check us out at thecollegeinvestor.com and follow us all over social media. Pretty much wherever you are, we're there too, at The College Investor. Thanks again for stopping by today, and we'll talk to you again real soon.